Michelle thinks American men suck.
Let me warn you, your rage does not exist in a vacuum. If we don't get this election right, your wife, your daughter, your mother, we as women will become collateral damage to your rage. To the women listening, we have every right to demand that the men in our lives.
Joe Rogan and Charlie Kirk didn't just call out Tim Walz, they ripped through his talking points like a tornado through a paper house. It wasn't a debate. It was a surgical takedown powered by facts, wit, and a complete disregard for political fluff. Walz came in with bumper sticker slogans, but Rogan and Kirk brought hammers of logic. By the time they were done, all that remained was silence and the sound of collapsing narratives.
Have to use our voices to make these choices clear to the men that we love. Our lives are worth more than their anger and disappointment.
What's that pitter-patter sound I'm hearing in the background? It's the footsteps of Barack running to vote for Trump. So, Kat, they know that they're having a hard time with men.
Right.
Doesn't seem like this is the right strategy.
No.
She basically says that
Rogan and Charlie Kirk are not known for subtlety when it comes to exposing political nonsense. And when they both take aim at Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, it's like watching two precision mechanics tear down a malfunctioning machine in front of a live audience. One comes in with the hammer of common sense and experience, the other with the chisel of sharp facts and relentless logic. Together, they turn Walz's political track record into a cautionary tale. Real time.
Michelle. According to a new poll, Michelle Obama isn't as strong a Democratic candidate against former President Donald Trump as many Dems would have you believe. In a hypothetical matchup, my favorite kind, Trump wins with 47% of the vote compared to Michelle Obama's 44%. I guess some of the kids whose school lunches she ruined are finally old enough to vote.
Rogan approaches it like a man who has seen a few too many smoke and mirror acts in his life. He is not impressed by appearances or polished speeches. He cares about results, about consequences, and about reality over illusion. And with Tim Walz, the illusion is exactly the problem. Rogan unpacks Walz's governing style like he's reviewing a bizarre conspiracy theory that somehow managed to get voted into office.
continue to escalate for the Obamas. Hopefully they can settle it like men.
He sees a leader obsessed with optics, glued to the idea of perception, yet completely detached from how his policies actually play out in the lives of real people. Joe starts by laughing at the absurdity of Walz's pandemic performance. Rogan, who has spent countless hours talking to doctors, scientists, and people from all walks of life, contrasts that with Walz, who treated the pandemic like a chance to audition for the role of emergency manager in a political drama series.
So, but her analysis seems a symptom of a greater problem that contributed to her party's loss. It goes back to seeing the group and not the person. I call it IPB, identity politics blindness. They lost not because Hillary was a woman, they lost because all they saw was a woman. Meanwhile, Trump took nothing for granted. Fact is, many voters would have happily voted for a woman, just not that one. Because unlike Trump, she didn't speak to their concerns. She only spoke of her entitlement. She just assumed that she had the vote. And just assuming a woman must vote for a woman seems pretty insulting from a man. Humans are more complex, surprising, and interesting than...
Have you ever seen that video? No. This is what people love about Donald Trump, the fact that he would say this. But unfortunately, Governor Walz isn't here himself. Don't worry, he'll say that he's going to say, I used to think the Democrats were crazy for saying that men have periods. But then I met Tim Walz. Minnesota became a place where gyms were shut down, but big box stores stayed wide open. Rogan tears into that logic with his trademark curiosity. How exactly does a virus avoid the aisles of retail chains but attack with full fury in barbershops and mom-and-pop diners? It gets even better when Joe drills into the governor's bizarre fixation with control. Rogan mocks the way Walz clung to emergency powers like a toddler who found the remote. There was no flexibility, no nuance, just a blunt, fear-driven rule book that made no room for common sense. Joe compares it to managing a city with the judgment of a bunker-bound weatherman calling hurricanes from his basement. The more absurd it got, the more Walz doubled down, and the more Joe grins. as he highlights every boneheaded decree with the enthusiasm of a man watching a bad sci-fi movie unravel. But Joe is not just a comic commentator. He digs deep. He hits the streets metaphorically and compares Walz's fantasy leadership to the real suffering on the ground. The businesses that closed and never reopened.
Michelle Obama has openly admitted that she and Barack sleep in separate bedrooms. Here's how it works. She sleeps downstairs and he likes men.
The family split apart by chaos and confusion, the health directives contradicting themselves weekly. Joe lays it out like a puzzle, except all the pieces are from different boxes, and Walz insists it still looks like a beautiful picture. Then, Charlie Kirk walks in, sleeves rolled up, and a stack of receipts in hand. Where Joe uses street-level wisdom and humor, Charlie brings the sharpness of political combat. He's less about laughs and more about the takedown. Charlie steps up like a prosecutor, laying out a case against a defendant who's already confessed. Through sheer incompetence, Charlie opens fire on Walz's economic policies, or rather, the lack of them. Minnesota under Walz became a test site for how quickly you can scare investment out of a state. Charlie paints the picture of a governor who acts like businesses are the problem, not the lifeblood of a functioning economy. While other states were reopening and rebuilding, Walz was issuing press statements about equity and climate justice while the small business community was desperately trying to keep the lights on. Charlie finds this hilarious and horrifying at the same time.
The latest installment of What Happened in an Election That Occurred a year and a half ago. Michelle Obama was asked how Trump won, and she laid the blame on Hillary. Just kidding, she blames sexism from women against women.
In light of this last election, I'm concerned about us as women and how we think. If we're not comfortable with the notion that a woman could be our president compared to what? You know, we have to have that conversation with ourselves.
He calls it leadership by press release, where the only thing growing is government spending and public confusion. He then goes straight for Walz's handling of crime, which Charlie treats like a dark comedy that never ends. Under Walz, Minnesota cities started to feel like they were being managed by someone who learned law enforcement policy from internet memes. Crime went up, morale in police departments tanked, and the streets became laboratories for progressive experiments gone very wrong. And through it all, Walz gave speeches about unity while acting like law enforcement was an optional feature in a modern state. Charlie pulls no punches when describing how Walz responded to the George Floyd riots. Rather than lead, Walz hesitated. Rather than stand up, he stepped back. Charlie illustrates the moment with the dry disdain of someone watching a man refuse to use the fire extinguisher in his hand because he's still checking the instruction manual. Walz's decision-making during that crisis, Charlie argues, was not just weak, it was dangerous. He calls it the leadership style of a substitute teacher who showed up with a guitar and a dream instead of a plan.
I've been busy working on a new podcast, and so far, it's been a flop. The first 2 episodes have been up all day and only gotten a few thousand views on YouTube. Half of them are probably primetime producers. But still, Michelle's spilling the family secrets, like how Barry gets on her nerves. Listen.
Barack, he had to adjust to what on time was for me.
On that island time.
Well, but I've got this husband who's like, when it's time to leave, it's 3 o'clock, he's getting up and going to the bathroom. And I was like, dude, like 3 o'clock departure means you've done all that, It's like, don't start looking for your glasses.
He calls it leadership by press release, where the only thing growing is government spending and public confusion. He then goes straight for Walz's handling of crime, which Charlie treats like a dark comedy that never ends. Under Walz, Minnesota cities started to feel like they were being managed by someone who learned law enforcement policy from internet memes. Crime went up, morale in police departments tanked, and the streets became laboratories for progressive experiments gone very wrong. And through it all, Walz gave speeches about unity while acting like law enforcement was an optional feature in a modern state. Charlie pulls no punches when describing how Walz responded to the George Floyd riots. Rather than lead, Walz hesitated. Rather than stand up, he stepped back. Charlie illustrates the moment with the dry disdain of someone watching a man refuse to use the fire extinguisher in his hand because he's still checking the instruction manual. Walz's decision-making during that crisis, Charlie argues, was not just weak, it was dangerous. He calls it the leadership style of a substitute teacher who showed up with a guitar and a dream instead of a plan.
About Michelle Obama's ongoing midlife meltdown
like like as you put it, her Stegosaurus hairdos. The utterance the other day, she says she's transitioning. I mean, I think we both know what she's trying to do by using that word.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you make of all of this? Like, what's going on in that psyche?
I think that transitioning line was meant to get attention because her podcast is failing. No one wants to watch it, and she's not used to that. You know, she's used to being the center of attention. Everyone's interested in me. I don't have to try hard.
And Walz seems to be managing a state like he's trying to trend on a platform instead of solving real problems. Joe makes it clear that people like Walz aren't interested in real conversations or real data. They just want to be liked by the people who already agree with them. Charlie Kirk wraps up with one final slap. He says, Walz is the perfect example of what happens when a governor tries to run a state like a graduate seminar. All theory, no practice. All talk, no traction. Minnesota is not a TED Talk, Charlie says. It's a real place with real people. And Walz treated it like a sandbox for elite ideas that fall apart the moment they touch the ground. In the end, Joe and Charlie don't just criticize Tim Walz, they demolish him. One with punchlines and comparisons, so sharp you forget it's political analysis. The other with data breakdowns and surgical attacks that leave no wiggle room. Together, they expose a man who talks like a reformer but governs like a guy who won a raffle to manage a state for a week. What makes the roast so entertaining is not just that it's funny, it's that every joke, every observation, every jab comes with undeniable truth.
Michelle Obama surprised fans on our new podcast by saying her pet peeve about her husband is that he's chronically late. For example, we're still waiting on him to admit he's from Kenya. And as for Barack's pet peeve about Michelle, he's mad that she keeps leaving the toilet seat up. When she cleans it. When she cleans it.
Walz built a career on slogans, smiles, and media passivity, but under the lights of Joe Rogan's scrutiny and the hammer of Charlie Kirk's logic, that image collapses. And when it collapses, there's no need for shouting or special effects. Two guys with microphones, common sense, and no patience for politicians who confuse emotional optics with actual outcomes. They don't just roast Walz, they turn his entire political blueprint into a museum of bad ideas. And the tour is free, hilarious, and brutally honest. Charlie Kirk leans in again, not finished, not even close. He shifts focus to Walz's bizarre obsession with creating a perfect society through government micromanagement. According to Charlie, Tim Walz governs like a man who just read a utopia novel and thought it was a policy manual. Everything becomes a social experiment, everything is a test case for how many committees you can build before someone notices nothing is actually getting done. Charlie points out how Walz's approach to leadership is rooted in the belief that government knows better than everyone else, better than parents, better than business owners, better than law enforcement.
The wonderful Megyn Kelly in the United States. Now, why is Michelle Obama whinging? She seems to always be whinging. Why are things so hard for her right now?
I know. I mean, because when you're thinking of victims of this awful world, you think of Michelle Obama and how terrible we've all been to her. This woman is a one-woman destitution derby. Every time we check in on her at her podcast, she is feeling sorry for herself. She is criticizing Barack Obama or this country. She never has a positive word to say about anything. And the latest example was when she went on this other guy's podcast, Jay Shetty. She goes and sits down with him, and he asks her, what are you afraid of? And she starts off by saying, well, it's not, my fears aren't for me. You know, I think about the streets. My fears aren't for me.
Well, in this current climate, for me, it's,
Better than reality itself. This, Charlie says, is where Walz truly shines in failure. Because once a politician believes they are the smartest person in every room, they stop listening. And when they stop listening, they start losing the plot. Joe Rogan finds the perfect spot to jump in again, this time turning his attention to Walz's astonishing ability to pretend like all his missteps are actually part of a master plan. Joe compares it to watching a magician pull a rabbit out of a hat and then try to convince the crowd that it was supposed to be a porcupine. Walz's speeches are filled with optimistic phrases that mean nothing. His press conferences sound like someone reading motivational posters aloud, while a city burns in the background. Joe also points out how Walz always seems to respond after the damage is done, that he is not proactive, he is reactive. But somehow, every time something collapses under his watch, he steps up to a podium and acts like he just discovered the problem with everyone else. Joe describes it like watching a guy break a window, then give a speech about how we all need to do better with glass safety. It's not just tone deaf, it's exhausting. Charlie takes aim at Walz's refusal to own anything. The man has a degree in blame deflection. Every time something goes wrong, it's someone else's fault. The federal government, local officials, climate change, Mercury in retrograde, but him. Charlie jokes that if Walz tripped over his own shoelaces, he'd blame the shoe industry and call for a statewide review of walking practices. Accountability is just a word he throws into sentences when the cameras are rolling. Rogan follows up by hammering the disconnect between Walz and the people he governs. There's no empathy, no awareness, no understanding of what working-class Minnesotans actually face. It's all filtered through advisors, headlines, and trending topics. Joe compares it to trying to run a farm based on Yelp reviews. Everything looks clean from the outside, but the inside is chaos and cows are missing. Charlie closes with a brutal summary. You've got to lose if we want to break this cycle. Walz is the governor of press conferences, not people. He's more interested in shaping narratives than shaping results. His greatest skill is turning political failure into soft-spoken disappointment, like whispering bad news somehow makes it less disastrous, but no amount of gentle phrasing can hide the damage. Minnesota, once a proud and functional state, has become the backdrop for Walz's ongoing seminar on what not to do. And just like that, Rogan and Kirk leave behind not just a political roast, but a full autopsy. The cause of death is clear: too much control, too little awareness, and a governor who confused power with progress.